Welcome back, friends, to what I have chosen to call the history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. You may call it what you like. Yeah, it's a short musical intro today, getting right down to it. It's a shoot episode, and like previous shoot episodes, it's largely unstructured. It's a little more off the cuff. It's a little more thoughts from outside the narrative that I usually hold steady to, which is history of a film, history of a musical artist, or history of their movement they were a part of, various artists perhaps. Today, I want to throw out some things that just didn't make the cut on the last episode featuring Guns N' Roses and Faith No More and Soundgarden and Chris Cornell. I wanted to share some scholarly information I've been hanging on to for a while about the state of rock radio in the late 90s and how it crashed and who did it and why, perhaps. I want to make a recommendation for another podcast. If you really want to know what the history of rock music was like in certain eras on the radio, if you want to know what rock and roll was up against in the 60s, if you want a really, really informative type of deep dive into what the public was really consuming during certain years, you don't go to the classics. You don't go to the obvious gold records and platinum records. You don't go to the charts where they always show you on the documentaries like, oh, look, there's Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. Oh, look, there's the Beatles' Abbey Road. There's Led Zeppelin 4. You go to the one-hit wonders, I say. I've learned a lot more from listening to loud, obnoxious, aging, twilight of his years comedian Gilbert Gottfried being asked to recall and then sing various top 10 hits from the 1960s on his own podcast than I have on any historical music or rock and roll oriented podcast that I have tried to listen to. And in their in fairness and in fairness to them and in favor of them, I am a quitter and I don't try very hard when it comes to listening to other people's work that doesn't immediately grab me. I've listened to the Slate podcast episode about Bruce Springsteen 2.5 times now for research I was doing for the upcoming someday Eddie and the Cruisers podcast. I hate a few things about that episode and the way the host speaks and the things he says, but I could still get through it for the sake of research. And I think they did a great job. And so did the host. I just despise the smarmy attitude in a couple of places that we'll get into when we come around to that thing. That whole Bruce Springsteen versus Eddie and the Cruisers intersection of culture. Now, I'm going to play a couple of excerpts from Gilbert's podcast that I have no legal right to do or to use. I am going to keep them very short so you can get a feel for the vibe and the energy of it and the entertainment value of it. I'm also going to put an effect on it so that the evil Matrix robots that scour the YouTube, sound files with their weirdo algorithm that's always mutating and changing to get stuff, everything I've tried to do musically that wasn't written by me, scrubbed from the internet, even if it was pirated by somebody else first, and I was pirating their pirating. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can see the miserable visual abortion that is a video on the YouTube feed that says Rock History MTV 1988 Jay and Dan, something to that effect. And I took from archive.org some supposedly fair use footage of MTV from someone's VHS rip that was uploaded. And I mean, we're not talking about big players here as far as number one hits that we were discussing and watching the videos for. We're talking about a little known single from Debbie Harry in her non-Blondie phase in the late 80s. We're talking a song by Kingdom Come, or was it I think one was Kingdom Come, but if I'm not mistaken, but one of them was definitely Bonham. Jason Bonham's band that sounded just like Kingdom Come, which sounded just like Led Zeppelin in an 80s capacity. It was updated for 80s rock radio, and it's these songs I'd never heard. Dan knew them. So we talked through some of that. I think that's valuable. I think I was glad we did it. I edited the thing, and I did some serious visual tricks to desaturate the colors and flip the images around backwards so that YouTube wouldn't strike me down. This is like 2 years ago. And they got me anyway. So we had to cut out a bunch of those videos. The ones that did stay in are unrecognizable visually for the most part. Some others came through okay because their publishing companies didn't come after us. What this comes down to is that other people can do it all the time because they already built up a certain amount of followers and they make a certain amount of money for YouTube and the publishing companies that hold the rights to these songs. If you didn't get in early on that game and you didn't build up a lot of monetization status and followers during the time when YouTube wasn't enforcing these laws, then you're kind of shit out of luck, unfortunately. And, it could be a lot of fun to do that kind of thing, to watch along some old MTV stuff, and it's just out of the question. So when I do it now, I do it simply with host segments like I did on Halloween. If you want to check that out, that's in the YouTube feed as well. You can get there through the Linktree link in the description of this and every episode. All right. So let's hear Gilbert singing Run, Joey, Run with a flanger on it. So if it sounds like it's in a tin can rolling around your head, that's intentional to disguise and distort the sound from, evil robots.
Our listeners are screaming.
Yeah. There's one song, it might be this one, where the music goes, it sounds like a gun being fired.
They're talking about
Are you thinking of
a fairly common theme in popular songs from 50s and 60s and 70s, which are death songs, murder songs. The Leader of the Pack was one back in the earlier radio days of girl groups and rock and roll stuff. And, there's always these stories about star-crossed lovers dying, just like in the old folk song tradition of the old country. But I'll put links into these two episodes that I'm dragging these details in from.
The one with the bank robber?
No, it wasn't. It might have been in there too, but it had to do with also a girl splitting with a guy.
Well, Joey, I guess Julie accidentally gets shot. You know the story of this song?
She runs to try to tell him to run.
Right.
And at the critical moment, she steps in front of him and takes the bullet.
There's always a tragedy. There's that what could have been if he had lived and not been accidentally shot by my father kind of a thing. And they go into the stories of all these and how ridiculous they are on various episodes just called. And I think a lot of these are behind a paywall now. They're bonus episodes. These are Death Songs of the 70s, Part 1 and 2. You can also check out the one-hit wonders of 1962, 1963, one-hit wonders of March 1974. They get really deep into them, and they ask Gilbert, do you remember this song? He's like, oh, is that the one where it goes? And then he sings like Gilbert Gottfried sings, and I can't do that. I will hurt myself, and it won't be funny to you anyway. But what I find so educational about this is these are the songs that most of America was listening to and loving. That whole tradition in the whatever 30s, 40s, and 50s radio hits of just people crooning about things, either crooning about being in love and having nice things happen and how nice the moon looks tonight, or crooning about some sort of tragedy like this, a misunderstanding, and non-rock and roll stuff. That's still what people were listening to in new forms. Like the song Patches, which I learned about through this.
Down in Alabama, in a shack way down in the woods. I was so ragged, my papa used to call me Patches. But I knew he was hurt, 'cause he done all he could. My papa was a brave old man. I used to see him with a shovel in his hand.
Is that not way more entertaining than most music history podcasts you've heard or rock history podcasts you've heard? Don't worry, there's more coming. I just want to keep breaking this up in case, I'm getting too close to getting a copyright strike.
Education he never had. I still remember my dear old dad saying, Patches, We're depending on you, son.
We got the idea.
All right, let's get into the leftovers. Leftovers from last episode that I couldn't fit that I want you to hear about. Let's talk about Mr. Kim Thile, another hanging thread from the Guns N' Roses episode and the Soundgarden involvement in Guns N' Roses, et cetera, et cetera. There's this other wild connection that I found in a book called They Just Seem a Little Weird, which I've had from the library for months and months and months and months and months, and they are sending the dogs after me to bring it back. I kept thinking I was going to be recording a more Kiss stuff by now. I've already done 2 little episodes, but this is about, Kiss and Cheap Trick and Aerosmith and the sort of the things that they did in the 70s that were different from their peers that helped them stand out. It also appears to be the only reference I can find to much of what Cheap Trick did in their history from a business standpoint or, performing standpoint. So I will probably be leaning on this book some more in the near future for my Rock and Rule episode. But I wanted to note that I keep finding quotes from Kim Thile in weird books where I don't expect him. This one is probably the one that I want to pull directly from today, but I already utilized a couple of quotes from the Nothing But a Good Time book about 80s hair metal. He's in that one. He's in the book about the history of shred guitar. Shredders by Greg Pareto. Got it right next to me. Let's see. Yeah, Greg Pareto, The Oral History of Speed Guitar and More. He's all over this thing. For some reason, they devote a lot of time towards the end of the book to the Meat Puppets and his quotes about them. I mean, I know they're respected musically in the alternative scene for being pretty wild and less grungy than most people think because they got noticed in the grunge era, but they were around through the 80s and they did a lot of really impressive shit and inspired a lot of people. But yeah, the Shredders book is great. I just don't know why there's so much space in it for conjecture from that side of things. It's not a strict chronological history of shred guitar, but there's pockets of it that give you that history that you can't get anywhere else. Very fascinating section just about the guitarists that were employed on the road and in the studio by Michael Jackson. There's more than you realize that, there are more names that you recognize than you would think if you're into instrumental guitar music from the 80s and 90s. So the Kim Thile interview section of this about Kiss, most artists from Kim Thile's generation were influenced by Kiss. He's given multiple interviews in guitar magazines where he said, the answer is the same as everybody else. I heard Love Gun by Kiss, and I had to go get a guitar and learn how to play. But the reason I want to share some details from this book is he actually gets into more of the chain of events that were set off by that and how it really broadened the scope of his rock and roll listening mind as it developed as a young person. This is, of course, at the time that Rock and Roll All Night finally becomes a hit single on the strength of its live version from the Kiss Alive album, which was their first hit after they put out Kiss, Hotter Than Hell, and Dress to Kill. Losing money all the way. And Kim Thile hears it on the radio. He has no idea who Kiss is or what they look like. It sounded to him like maybe it could be BTO, taking care of business kind of stuff, or You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, because that's kind of typical 1974 rock radio, guitar-oriented music, riff-oriented music. But when the DJ says the name of the band is Kiss, it's like, because it sounds more like an R&B band name or a girl group name, as the author points out. Doug Broad, B-R-O-D. He gets a copy of Alive at a local shop and looks at the cover, expecting to see what would be typical of the time. A bunch of long-haired guys, feather-haired guys with like mustaches and beards and like open collars, maybe little chest hair showing. But instead, other than maybe Alice Cooper, they're the only people he's seen looking like theatrical or shocking or scary with their face makeup and their costumes and stuff. And he buys this Kiss record from a clerk at the record store in Park Forest Plaza, shopping center. A clerk named Tom Zitaut, who he knew from high school. If I liked Rock and Roll All Night, which I do, will I like the other songs, Thile asked? The titles look like they might be rocking. Yeah, it's pretty consistent, Zitaut responded. That was good enough for Thile. Zitaut would later put his perspective ear to extraordinary use as an A&R executive signing Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses to major label deals. This was an important question because if you liked a song you heard on the radio, it might have been the only good thing on the album, Thile explains. You'd have an album built around the top 40 hit, maybe 2 top 40 hits, and then everything else was filler. They were the heaviest thing in me or my friend's record collection, he said. It was going beyond Beatles and Elton John and Bachman Turner Overdrive. So then he becomes a bit obsessed with getting the rest of their material, so he joins the Columbia Record and Tape Club, which, as most of you know, is a mail-order service that gives you like monthly deliveries of cassettes or albums for discounted prices. Because there's not I guess probably just there's no overhead of having a store and a retail outlet with the bills you got to pay there. Just a warehouse to ship things out from. And they always would get you in with this price of like 10 records for a penny. And then you would be on the hook for whatever they billed you for after that. Of course, in the pre-internet era and the like everyone's personal information is available via their social security number through computers databases. Lots of people just sort of slowly stopped paying Columbia House and got away with it for a long, long time. I would have to say that's probably on Columbia House for, not checking the books often enough, not following up. But the point of this is he got signed up with it purely for Kiss records. Well, then, you run out after like the first 3 and you've already got the new live album. So now you're in the program. So what does he spend his money on? What other albums does he get? Well, he starts taking risks on bands that he had read about or heard on FM radio. He gets Toys in the Attic by Aerosmith. He gets Ted Nugent, some Jethro Tull. And he says, and some crappy records I ended up selling to a used record store to get money for cigarettes and gas. Of course, in 1984, Kim Thile goes on to start Soundgarden in Seattle with Chris Cornell, and Hiro Yamamoto credits this whole fertile period in his rock listening mind for putting him on the path to being a musician, picking up the guitar, learning to play heavy riffs, wanting to create his own heavy riffs, and really, really do this, really take this identity of his to heart. He talks about his growing fascination with Kiss after getting the records, and he says, Paul Stanley was pretty cool, that guitar hanging there, strapped low. The difficult aspect of his fanaticism was trying to legitimize Kiss to disbelieving friends, a rite of passage that has been endured by nearly every admirer of the band. This is a common theme. This is a thing that shows up in the movie Rock and Roll, Detroit Rock City, which we'll get to one of these days, God willing. Like get through all those other little episodes of 70s and 80s TV shows that have Kiss themes in them. Maybe I'll abandon that plan. I don't know. I was pretty excited by the idea that like there's sort of a Kiss Quantum Leap episode. There's a Kiss kind of Love Boat episode, but it's with Sonny Bono looking like he's in Kiss. And then there's an Incredible Hulk episode with a singer who looks like she's a member of Kiss with the face paint and the hair and stuff. But he talks about, he bought a Kiss songbook and learned that Nothing to Lose was in 7/4 time. And he would grab a friend and say, 7/4, man, check it out. Some of his friends would concede that 7/4 was a difficult time signature to play. But Thile says nobody was having any of it because it didn't quite compare to Led Zeppelin. And he says they were right. Took me a while to understand that. I don't think anyone appraised Kiss as musicians in any regard. At best, they were underrated. I mean, they were playing their instruments while wearing high heels with their legs spread and the guitars at the weird angle. His band, of course, Soundgarden, would later pay homage to Kiss with a jokey scream fest called Sub Pop Rock City. So the Tom Zitaut, Kim Thile exchange is probably the last of the Guns N' Roses Soundgarden connections that I had to throw in there that I just didn't have time to put in the last episode. It got to 8.5 hours. It was ridiculous. But there's another connection with another band that I talked about there that I want to bring up because it did not come to mind until after I was done recording and had released it. And I almost went back into my recording program and tacked on like a 10-second explanation right before the very end and like edit in this one little tidbit and then re-upload the whole episode. So the people that had heard it first within the first day wouldn't have heard this part unless they went back to their live podcasting page and streamed it again while the streaming service is pulling from my new upload, right? Well, it's this. I'm going to say it here because I have enough other loose threads that I wanted to put in one episode that didn't necessarily need to be a full episode about a band or a film. And it's kind of a reach, but it's still fascinating. Okay? This is not like, this is conspiratorial stuff. This is like wacky cosmic universe conspiracy theory things. There's a part in the last episode where, after discussing at great length the problems that Faith No More encountered touring with Guns N' Roses and the problems that Guns N' Roses had with Faith No More being so bitchy and passive aggressive and somehow confrontational in their own way at the same time, and doing lots of interviews where they were trashing Guns N' Roses and Axl Rose specifically, and Axl being just flabbergasted about this. Like, I mean, I gave you this opportunity. I love your band. I've been talking about how good you are. Meanwhile, Faith No More is just like, yes, we're broke. We're telling everyone we can. Like, it's nice of Axl and Slash to say good things about us in the press, but how about could I get $20, Axl? Like, we're riding around in a van and we're making no money. That's a problem they had with their record label too. It was bad times for Faith No More all around. So, years later, as discussed in that episode, Axl Rose is working on what will become an album called Chinese Democracy. And one engineer that he brings in, he feels some strange energy from. This is over 10 years after the 1992 Video Music Awards incident where Courtney Love gets all up in Axl Rose's face, and Axl, not willing to hit a woman who's pissing him off, tells Kurt Cobain he's going to hit him if he doesn't get his wife under control. Ever since then, he's avoided her like the plague. I remember an MTV interview, I think late in the 90s, or maybe it was a VH1. It might have been a VH1 interview because they didn't have any music on MTV for a long time by the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. Well, anyway, Courtney Love's being interviewed about something, and they ask about the state of rock and roll today. And she's like, oh, it's so lame. We need Axl Rose back. Please, Axl, come back. Please, please, please. And like she does the little Axl Rose dance and stuff. And she seems pretty genuine. She seems earnest. She seems like, she was like, that guy was dangerous and he was unpredictable and there's nobody like that anymore. Which is interesting. That's interesting of her to give him that compliment and to be in his corner. But yet, the residual cosmic stink of her on this engineer was something Axl couldn't explain, yet couldn't deal with in his presence anyway. So he fired the guy. Turns out he was living with Courtney Love at the time, and they were, in a relationship. Without having told Axl that, Axl could feel something he didn't like in the guy. Fun stuff, interesting stuff if you're into that. I don't have an explanation for why you would feel that way, but there could be a lot of reasons why you don't like the vibe of somebody if you're a very sensitive person. I think that's probably a coincidence with the whole Courtney Love thing. But here's a retroactive connection that I forgot to mention in that episode. And I think it's a bit of a crime that I didn't. I forgot about it until I was sent YouTube footage that's available now from 1982-ish of Courtney Love when she was in Faith No More. She was a singer in Faith No More for a short time. Also was watching YouTube footage from Ricky Rackman, Headbangers Ball, 1992, on the road with Guns N' Roses and Faith No More, interviewing both bands backstage. And I believe it is Roddy Bottom. No, Billy Gould. I think it's Billy Gould, the bass player, wearing a Hole t-shirt in 1992. Of course, that's Courtney Love's band. She sang and played guitar in. So they were still friendly at that point, obviously. She was a member of Faith No More. Faith No More and Axl Rose did not get along. Courtney Love and Axl Rose did not get along. It's the circle of life. Now, the ending of this Guns N' Roses talk for the time being, at least the Use Your Illusion era Guns N' Roses talk, does lead me to a detail about Marilyn Manson. Not just the fact that Marilyn Manson had... Nope, wait, I was thinking of Robin Fink, who played with Nine Inch Nails, not Marilyn Manson. I was going to say Robin Fink went on to be in Guns N' Roses, but that's not the case. He's not a Manson guy. He's a Nine Inch Nails guy. But Manson claims credit for the Charles Manson connection to Axl Rose in his fandom of Charles Manson, Axl. And the inclusion of a Charles Manson song snuck into the spaghetti incident that Marilyn Manson turned him on to it. This is detailed in his book, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell. And I did check it out from the library last year and flipped through it and absorbed quite a bit. Not enough to make me want to do an episode fully on Marilyn Manson, though he's obviously a fascinating character in a lot of different ways and a performer who's, accomplished a lot of things that a lot of performers wish they could have accomplished. There's no movie connected with him that I really want to cover at this time compared to all the 15 other projects I've got for this show. I mean, I'm talking about Grand Theft Parsons. I'm talking about Phantom of the Paradise. I'm talking about Josie and the Pussycats, another couple of singles episodes, a Little Richard biopic, plus The Girl Can't Help It, 2 more Misfits type film thingies. I don't want to blow it right now. Elvis, Valley Girl, Crossroads. Obviously, I'm in the middle of that second Crossroads episode. Anyway, and there's 6, 7 more on my list of things, especially The Crow, that I have already started work on as of, I don't know, either last week or last year. So, and yes, you could say maybe, I don't know, a few things that he had songs on the soundtrack for, probably Natural Born Killers. He must have been on that one, right? Trent Reznor was on that. Nine Inch Nails was on that with Burn. And they were tight at that time. So maybe he has something on there, something to do with that movie. I don't know. But there was a falling out with them around David Lynch and the Lost Highway film. I guess I want to mention that because I think it's interesting because I never really knew what their big deal was and why Manson just suddenly hated Trent's guts, and Trent was just like, yeah, whatever. In interviews, we were friends, we're not friends anymore. Manson got angry when he got this gig working on the soundtrack to Lost Highway with David Lynch. And then Lynch started getting cozy with Trent Reznor in the studio, and Twiggy Ramirez of Marilyn Manson's band, Marilyn Manson, called him on the phone and said, you better get down here because these guys are starting work on the project without you and not telling you. So he busts in and has a big argument with everybody involved and, tells Trent to go fuck himself, and he's stealing his project and stealing, essentially stealing this money out from this job out from under him. I feel like that's not enough reason to end that relationship when someone like Trent Reznor is the reason why you got a record deal in the first place. Trent Reznor not only, got him signed to Nothing Records, which was part of his deal with Interscope. He wanted to have his own record label and sign things. But when Interscope Records came forward and told Trent, we don't want this artist, we don't want you to sign him, and we refuse to support this decision. He said, okay, that's fine. I have a stipulation in my contract where I can still create my own record label completely separate from the influence of Interscope Records, and I'll just put Marilyn Manson on that, and I'll make the money. I'll keep all that money myself. And they'll, obviously they'll keep their money, but he'll be the guy that signs them and produces them and fosters their career for the time being. And they caved in. They said, well, all right. So he stuck his neck out for them, got them the deal, took them on tour, obviously, had them as an opening act for, as long as it took for them to get noticed by everybody and start making headlines around the country in the mid-1990s. This is the Bill Clinton era. Things, the economy's doing well, and society in America is in a very comfortable place. So these are the prosperous times, it seems to me, in America, at least in my lifetime, are the times when really shocking art comes around and gets embraced by large swaths of the public. When things got shitty, in the economy and politically, and when there's like war going on and stuff, and people are frightened about real world things, and they don't have time for the whimsy of this weird, provocative, psychosexual, religious character that just wants to push America's buttons no matter what they are. Things get real. They start examining what you do and what you say and turning away from it, if not trying to get it banned, things like that. Things get real, and then someone like Eminem comes along and becomes the face of provocative American entertainment, and is, because he's rooted in reality, way more rebellious in his the effect he has is much more serious, but it's also somehow easier to absorb, I guess. People need grounded shit. So, suddenly Marilyn Manson seems like a joke, and he's not used to that. Guar is a joke. They're disgusting and confrontational, but they're meant to be fun. And even if you don't get it or don't like it, it doesn't affect you or offend you. Marilyn Manson, on the other hand, is like, offensive to people who never pay attention to him. And it's also sad to me to have seen him go from someone who I didn't necessarily like listening to musically when he was big on that American, what is it? The Antichrist superstar jag of his career. When he was everywhere, and but to see him go from that era where he was always doing interviews and always showing up on TV and being ridiculed, but then showing himself to be the smartest person on the dais, the smartest person with a microphone in front of them without fail. Every time some show or some news program or talk show or whatever tried to make him out to be funny and silly or take him seriously as a serious person that means every single word that he says in his act, he always destroyed. He just crushed in conversation. He was always more thoughtful. He was always more insightful. He could always back up every single thing he was saying and doing. It's sad to see him go from that to, let's say, around the 2010s or so and afterward, where he's just, showing up on that metal show being incoherent and fat and clumsy and uncoordinated and not interesting at all. And even worse, to see, allegations of sexual assault against him from a longtime girlfriend or two, and allegations of, grooming a person that was not quite 18 when they started communicating with each other. Maybe it was younger than not quite 18. Maybe there's more examples of it. I can't, speak with any authority there, obviously. I hate seeing that stuff. It grosses you out. It's vile. It's reprehensible. If you're Marilyn Manson and you're into control and you're into domination and, the sexual thrill of being mean to somebody who gets off on having someone being mean to them and be controlling to them and punishing them, there's a kabillion girls out there that are super into it, and I'm sure they line up with your tastes just fine. No one needs to be fishing in those waters, let alone someone rich and famous. But that's the point, isn't it? That's the point of that thrill. That's the point of that predatory payoff. It's getting away with things that you're not supposed to be able to get away with, but you can because you're rich and famous. Or you're in power. Maybe you're a cop. Maybe you're a politician. But back to his bio, the structure of it. There's a lot of drug stories you can't trust, but they're interesting. There's a lot of dreams and visions that he has, and he takes from his journal and puts into the book directly. His band stuff from that time, the making of the Antichrist Superstar album, and his backstory as a young man growing up and getting the deal, with Marilyn Manson. There's a lot of derisive language about people's looks that wouldn't fly today on the newsstand, on the paperback book bestseller, list at your local department store. His hatred for people extends, from their intellect to their physical looks. And that's something that we as a society in this time, when I'm speaking in 2000, 22? We don't have as much taste for, we don't have as much tolerance for. I mean, just looking back at the difference in the public reception to the Harry Potter books in the late 1990s versus today. Today, a lot of people that read those books when they were young are having kids and looking back at them and opening them up and realizing, oh, there's a lot of really mean-spirited body shaming stuff in here. There's a lot, like everyone that's evil has to be ugly. There has to be, physical attributes that reflect a cruel soul or a gluttonous person. And I'm sure a lot of that when it comes to fantasy writing is rooted in old-timey fairy tale stuff, when people resented the ruling class for being fat, while they were starving in the streets. That's my little conjecture. I don't have any academic basis for that, but I can only assume. But he loves describing people and how unattractive to him they are when he doesn't like them. He's just, he is like a teenager. He's like a cranky teenager, and that's why he did so well with cranky teenagers in the 90s. He's just looking around the world and seeing how full of shit everybody is and how corrupt all these systems are and how he is going to shove it down. He's going to shove the ugliness back down America's throat. That's his goal. And there's something really admirable about that to a point, of course, but it's a tough read nowadays because you got to understand this book, it's at a time when everyone wanted a piece of this guy. They wanted to look inside his soul and his motivation. They wanted to know his reasoning behind every single choice and decision he's made in his career, what led up to it. So it's a fascinating kind of autobiography that I don't think you would get a decade before or a decade after. I just don't trust the accuracy of all of his recollections of how certain interactions went down with certain people. Nothing in particular, just that he's always doing drugs and he's always fucked up and he's always getting in fights. People like that. We've all known people like that, and they have a ton of stories. Al Jurgensen from Ministry has a little of this element in his own autobiography. There's a lot of shit in there that he comes at people really hard. And you kind of go, yeah, dude, but look, this guy was an asshole to me for no fucking reason. Yeah, but I've just been reading about 10 years worth of you being drunk and high all the time. I don't know, man. And you talked about a lot of time you wasted in the studio, and you talked about a lot of fucked up shit you were getting into. Getting thrown out of a lot of places for being an asshole. That's the number one thing that a lot of comedians will talk about. Every single person that goes online and says, fuck this club. I went there to see Jim Norton, and halfway through the set, he had us thrown out for no reason at all. When there's 50 people from that show that know exactly why you got thrown out. Son of a bitch. You were loud and mouthy and drunk, and so was your partner, and you were talking at the stage, and you were interrupting the comedian, whatever. Music, of course, we have amplifiers and PA systems that are way more powerful, so you can't do that to us. Ha 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 ha. Even at the level that I'm at, you can't you can't do that. I have had experiences with people just coming on the side of the stage and requesting songs from me, but that's neither here nor there. But the main reason I did pick up that book was simply to see how much Trent Reznor content was in it. And I wanted to see how much Trent Reznor content was in it because I was going to be covering Light of Day. Of course, there was so much Joan Jett content to get through. I didn't think it was necessary then. I'm going to do a Trent Reznor section of the Crow episode. James O'Barr was heavily influenced by the work of Joy Division when he wrote The Crow. Specifically the lyrics and the vocals of Ian Curtis. There's going to be, undoubtedly there's an influence on Trent Reznor from Joy Division and probably some New Order as well. So I think it's very cool that Trent decided to cover a Joy Division song for the Crow soundtrack. That's kind of a fitting tribute considering, what had happened to James O'Barr's wife to be and what had happened to Ian Curtis and what had happened to Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow. So I keep saying stay tuned for that Crow episode, man. But I've done a lot of research on. I've written up pages and pages and pages of stuff last year. I just a lot of little things came up along the way, so it is coming. It's probably going to be a 3-parter. I don't know, but you can't trust me. I mean, I'm recording this March 19th, like 5 days maybe after I released the Guns N' Roses Soundgarden Audioslave episode, and I'm halfway done with the Steve Vai Shredder Guitar Crossroads episode, and I'm dilly-dallying over here in this other episode just to justify the amount of time I held on to that book that had the quotes from Kim Thile in it about Kiss, because that's been sitting in my home for so many months with bookmarks in it. Speaking of books that have Kim Thile's quotes in them, and some that you wouldn't necessarily expect, that Nothing But a Good Time album that I used to quote at the beginning of the Guns N' Roses episode also has some pretty insightful comments from Kim Thile about, the so-called death of hair metal and grunge coming in and killing it. And I think he's delivered some of the smarter thoughts on that topic compared to what I usually hear. It's just sort of a really reductivist, like, oh, Smells Like Teen Spirit came on MTV, and now everyone's out of a job, right? Suddenly, if you had a pointy guitar with bright colors and big hair, you couldn't get arrested anymore. You couldn't get any opportunities in the music business. Well, yes, that is what naturally happens after 10 straight years of no one getting a job in the music business unless they had a pointy, neon-colored guitar and big hair. There's a few new wave there's new wave examples aside, but generally a lot of those came from Europe. We're talking about America. We're talking about predominantly West Coast recording industry and filming on sound stages, making videos for MTV, kind of part of the industry. And the record labels are mostly in LA or New York. And I think, Kim Thile makes it clear, like, they didn't come in with a sense of competition. None of their bands from Seattle came down to LA to clean up the town and like scare away all the glam rockers or anything. They've just been doing what they've been doing in their own way since the 80s. They got found out by people that had the power and the money to put them on the radio and put them on MTV after a long time of working hard on indie labels and things like that. I mean, in a lot of cases, not obviously that doesn't apply to everybody from that scene, but it applies to a lot of bands from the quote unquote alternative scene or the underground or the college radio circuit through the 80s that got big in the early 90s. There's a reason why REM, did so well on the charts after a good, I don't know, what did they put out? Like 4 or 5 albums before that, before the Out of Time came out. I'm not a scholar when it comes to REM, but that's an example. An American band that ascended to prominence in the mainstream in the early 1990s, at a time when the big hair bands were going down. And it's just sort of what naturally happens after most groups of teenagers grow up and buying records and going to concerts and spending their money on band t-shirts is not their priority anymore. You still want to write about just the good times and all the same stuff that you wrote about in the heyday of Sunset Strip. Well, people got killed, people died of drug overdoses, people got ripped off during that time, artists, a lot of them. You also had a good 10 years straight of the same kind of hairstyles, people buying their clothes from the exact same designers, people doing the same poses on stage and on MTV videos, people playing guitar in a very similar style, people singing in a very similar style. You get a good 10 years from, the inventiveness of Randy Rhoads and Jake E. Lee on the Ozzy Osbourne, guitar playing side of things to the early to mid 80s, right? That kind of sets a lot of the standard in the post Van Halen era for commercial rock guitar playing that is also highly specialized and difficult to do without lots of practice and dedication, right? Those are some examples of the best when it comes to crystallizing the commercial aspect, as well as the fortitude it takes and the musical acumen it takes and the performance ability to to have it all as a guitarist, a prominent gig, some great chops, the attention of lots of guitar magazines that want to know how you do what you do, and lots of fans, and endorsement deals, some great looking gear that sounds good, that you don't have to beg and beg for or borrow. You get from 81 to 91, there's a lot of bands between your Rats and your Dawkins and your Whitesnakes, and I'm not putting them down, up through to your Tricksters and your Slaughters and your Firehouses that are all capitalizing on the popularity of guitar-based rock that goes lots of double stops and dyads and little high string chord inversions and things. Not strumming full chords. Not jangly, not sloppy punk rock either. Not new wavy keyboardy stuff. Just that guitar style and that guitar sound, a cranked up, humbucker equipped guitar through a Marshall or a heavily modified Marshall or a Soldano amp or some other kind of preamp going into, power amp and a rack system. The fact that made it 10 years is, quite frankly, a huge achievement for all the people involved. Because look what happened after that. They love to say that, grunge killed off all that great guitar playing. And they have a point. But what what they never take into account and they never talk about is what we think of as the grunge bands lasted essentially 3 years in the top of the public's consciousness. 91 to 93, well, let's stretch it out to 94 when Kurt Cobain kills himself. Let's say that. Let's say, that's the 3-year span. 2 Pearl Jam albums, 2 major Nirvana albums in between. There was Incesticide as a release to sort of fill the gap between the 2 major studio releases. And what after that? It's time for Green Day. It's time for some good old California sunshine. It's time for Sublime. It's time for No Doubt. It's time for Smash Mouth. It's time for happy music. It's time for upbeat pop music, even if it does have crunchy guitars in some places. This is around the time, Kurt Cobain dies, Smashing Pumpkins break up, Pearl Jam stops talking to the press, stops putting out videos, stops doing tours when they have to work with Ticketmaster, so they're choosing other venues. And, Alice in Chains puts out their Jar of Flies EP and then slowly starts withering away until about 96, and they come out with, one more full-length album as a band with the original, singer. But they're not an ongoing concern. They're not recording. They're not touring. They're not doing much in the way of interviews unless it's to do with the side project that someone else is involved in. And those are the mega powers. Those are the main acts that were very dominant on the radio and MTV of the so-called grunge era. All right, then what? It's happy time, and then it's aggro time. It's Korn. I mean, Korn comes out like 95. But they spawned a bunch of imitators that carry over into the late 90s and early 2000s. It's super aggro, also emotionally distressed male singers, twitching and jumping around and whimpering and shouting and doing their thing the way that they know how to do it, I guess. And then what else is rock doing? It's getting poppy on the other end. There's a few things here, and there's your one-hit wonders like Fastball, to sort of ride on the coattails of the success of someone like Smash Mouth, maybe. But maybe if you want to blame grunge for killing off the hair metal thing, fine. But if that was all it took, then how come it couldn't come back in 2 years? Well, the audience wasn't there. The audience wasn't going to be there until it was time for some nostalgia. And then, great, comes back. I don't want anyone to lose their job. I don't want anyone to lose their band. I don't want anyone to lose their record deal. But that's what happens when you're in a part of a very trendy industry. There's no guarantees. No one said you're going to get to be the Beatles or Led Zeppelin and put out like 5 to 6 albums in a row that are all going to be, game changers for the entire industry. That's not a normal working model. You had a lot of good times and a lot of free drugs and a lot of free booze and a lot of good sex and a lot of partying and a lot of attention on the radio and MTV for a few years at a time. And then, like everybody else, suddenly you weren't famous anymore. That's how most of us live. Make plans to do something else. Move on. You'll find it's not as easy just to go to a coffee house and put on a sweater and act like Eddie Vedder, like Mark Wahlberg at the end of the movie Rockstar. That's not where you came from. You probably don't get to just turn it around that fast. So, hey, Jay, do you have any reference besides your own attitude for what kills off rock and roll in the mid to late 90s? Because I, and a lot of other people that lived through that era, do feel like it didn't just take a nosedive in quality, it was squelched out, with the exception of a few outliers that managed to work the business in a way that helped them survive by getting bigger, becoming a huge country in and of themselves, essentially. People like Metallica, people that have the support of the industry because they're willing to play ball, but also they keep, employing people. U2 is one of those. It's like Chuck D said in the 90s when they traveled, they traveled with their own government, their own system of operating, basically. They are an entity and a brand unto themselves. They have a huge workforce around them. And if you're a band like Metallica, just for an example, because they're relevant to the conversation, you can kind of do no wrong because you're staying in the industry, you're employing people in the industry, you play ball with Clear Channel, as we saw in the some kind of monster documentary, and you have people whose interests are tied to yours. Their family doesn't eat unless your family eats, if we're talking about success here. So back in 2021, November 15th, I saw this Twitter thread and I saved it for a future episode to discuss. And I think the day has come where it's fairly relevant because of, the smarmy, snarky attitude I have about the end of the Sunset Strip rock and roll hair metal thing. And how things just sort of die out and get taken over every few years when it comes to trends and what the youth are relating to. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that in the mid-late 90s, the taste just changed and got very narrow when it came to popular music, especially rock. You could also be forgiven if you just think that, music sucked after you got out of high school or got out of college or whatever it was, when new modern popular music of some kind stopped being important to your daily life because the new stuff wasn't really reaching you and you think the new stuff sucks. I, for my part, got to a point in the late 90s where I'm like, it's all either like this Dave Matthews-y, Eagle-Eyed Cherry, John Mayer soft-spoken stuff, or it's Limp Bizkit and Korn, and I don't have any recourse in between. I think I'm going to go get into Muddy Waters and Hank Williams and Robert Johnson like a motherfucker. But back to Twitter, this thread is started by Patchen Mortimer at PatchDJ, PATCHDJ, and I'll include a link to his radio show. He's responding to a post from November 14th by someone named John Asbear out of 4 Fink. Asbear over 4, whatever. Who said, music and pretty much everything we regard as art is largely terrible no matter what year you're talking about. You just don't remember the bad bits. Patchen says, and I'm going to be quoting him straight through this thread, so not to pick on John, but this take is actually wrong and the original poster is right because something catastrophic did happen to Gen X and the Zillennials music. The Telecommunications Act of 1996. It's story time, kids. 1991 and 94 was one of those rare periods where the critics and the public were in alignment. The music that was good, TM, was the music getting airplay. I'm mostly speaking grunge/alternative, but I believe this was also true of rap, thanks to the East-West beef. If you're not familiar with what he means by that, see, I'm already deviating. I thought I was going to read all the way through. He's talking Biggie and Tupac and Snoop Dogg, maybe some Death Row versus whatever Puffy's label was. Whatever Puff Daddy and the family were doing. Look up Source Awards, Snoop Dogg speech, angry people on YouTube, I suppose. And also, I've long equated this downturn in, good varieties of rock music to more like the consolidation of the industry in terms of, large entertainment companies buying record labels and just sort of folding them into, their PlayStation endeavors, right? Sony was a music company, and then it's a video game company. Microsoft comes along with the Xbox, and they're their own thing, but they put out music on video games like Sony does. That's the new jukebox. That's the new radio station. But there's only so much that they can do. But radio is definitely not doing it anymore. MTV is definitely not doing it anymore. They're doing reality TV shows in the late 90s. Anyway, back to Patch and Mortimer. He says, he's talking 94 now. Then Cobain dies and grunge becomes rudderless. Eddie Vedder does not want the job. Alternative music doesn't get bad, though. It just gets weird. The A&R guys have been throwing contracts at bands left and right, trying to find the next big thing. Even more so post-Cobain. And all those folks were now putting out records, and radio station music directors are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. The fall of 1995, all by itself, is bonkers. Here are some of the songs you might have heard then, with a few bleeding into spring, from a radio show I did a few years ago. This is basically alternative radio chaos. Scum by Meat Puppets. Good by Better Than Ezra. Molly, 16 Candles by Sponge. All Over You by Live. Misery by Soul Asylum. Hook by Blues Traveler. Send Me On My Way. On My Way. Send Me On My Way. Rusted Root. Hand in My Pocket. Alanis Morissette. Do You Sleep? Lisa Loeb. Car Song. Elastica. Bouncing Around the Room. Live. Fish. I Got a Girl, Tripping Daisy, Lump, Presidents of the United States of America, Bullet with Butterfly Wings, Smashing Pumpkins, Name, Goo Goo Dolls. He's also got like Silverchair, Jim Blossoms, Dave Matthews, Sun Volt, Southern Culture on the Skids, Loud Lucy, 311, Rancid, Joan Osborne, Toadies, No Doubt, Everclear, The Rentals, Deep Blue Something, and Oasis. He says, and this goes on. True fact, in 1997, an MTV executive said, we've been looking at Europe, and this... You can almost picture his fingers making air quotes. Electronica stuff is the next big thing. And the rock listening public goes, LOL, we just heard Sublime and watched Swingers. We're going to do freaking ska and swing for the next 2 years. Electronic would have to wait till 98, 99 when Big Beat broke through. But something else happens in 1996, the Telecommunications Act, which is good for a lot of things, but loosens the restrictions on who can own how many stations where. Clear Channel goes on a buying spree, and this turns out to be Armageddon for rock radio. Suddenly, one dude in Texas is programming nearly every alternative station in the country, or at least enough to dictate the tone for everyone else. Forget local scenesters bubbling up, or weirdos like Southern Culture on the Skids, and Ween, and President of the USA getting airplay. You're getting pop punk, rap rock, and boy bands on repeat. Music calcifies in 1999. You can even tell when it happens because Enema of the State tops the charts seemingly forever, and women disappear from rock radio completely. Lilith Fair runs from 97 to 99 and puts out multiple double CD collections. By 2001, you'd think no woman but Gwen Stefani and Meg White ever touched an instrument. An entire burgeoning folk rock ecosystem gets snuffed out. Instead, over in pop, we got Britney and Christina and the rest, which is fine, and I don't hate pop punk either. I love it, actually. And nu metal is okay-ish, but that single Texan locus of musical control was not fine. And if you were a Gen Xer, a zillennial like me, who went off to, say, a rural liberal arts college in a cocoon of college radio in 1996, coming back to mainstream radio in summer of 2000 was like surveying the asteroid aftermath 65 million years ago. Where'd all the T-Rexes go? Rock music never recovers. Not really. It has a brief stroke, see what I did there, of a resurgence in 2001 thanks to the White Stripes and the NYC scene, and a few Brooklyn breakouts over the next 2 decades, but those are coalescent possums, remnants of better days. coalescence. Sorry. I don't know what that word is. Plenty of other stuff is wrong with music right now. The incubation system and the studio gatekeeping labels used to provide is gone, which is good because production and publication has been democratized, but bad because no one is making money, and so many songs feel only 3/4 of the way finished. And pop and hip-hop's habit of using roughly the same 7 producers for years at a time has glued those genres in sap on its way to becoming amber. Trap music, for instance, needs to go desperately. If I ever hear another hi-hat triplet, I am fine with that. Those are issues for another day, but to go back to the original post, it is totally fair for Gen Xers to feel like something went terribly wrong. Because if your ideal era is 91 to 94 or even 91 to 97, something did. As usual, the culprit was deregulation under capitalism. And as usual, it's easier to point at each other and say, "You're doing it wrong, get over it," when the proper response is, "Holy crap, you guys got screwed. Here's a hug. I wonder how else we are getting screwed." Postscript. Many people took away from this thread that I'm some curmudgeon who hates all music after 96. I get why. My amusing myself with snarky notes on current issues led some folks astray. But I'm actually a huge new music advocate who does a weekly new music show. So if you love my thread, and especially if you hated it and think I'm a miserable middle-aged white dude, I hope you'll check out my show and hear the reality. This link is good most weeks from Tuesday at 11 p.m. through Monday at midnight. I clicked on the link he provided and it goes to a page not found. So I went and searched the name of his show on the website for the radio station, WMUC-UMD.edu. And I believe I've got what should be a very reliable source for his weekly doings and comings and goings on the air. One of the responses further down says some Ted Vician. In 94 to 96, I saw Melissa Etheridge twice, Indigo Girls, Sarah McLachlan twice, Sheryl Crow, etc. And then boom, the whole world forgot that women could sing and play instruments. Another commenter, Prof D, obviously disagrees, says, "Where are all the black women?" And Patchen says, "That's a whole other excellent question. I was mostly listening to rock music, so Tracy Chapman and the Fugees were basically it, at least as I remember. I wasn't listening to much pop or hip-hop except at dances, so I can't speak with much authority there and wouldn't want to try." And I personally agree with that perspective, and I relate to that perspective, and that's why you don't hear me talking about that kind of stuff very much. I'm just not there with the expertise and the knowledge and the firsthand experience. But I would recommend, again, a YouTube channel I think I've mentioned on previous episodes called Todd in the Shadows. And, his breakdown of the Train Records series he has, his breakdown of Lauryn Hill 2.0 or Unplugged 2.0 is really interesting on the background it gives on Lauryn Hill's career and, how that album and that concert was sort of the big breaking point where she starts to kind of unravel psychologically and become the Lauryn Hill that we got more familiar with in the press and in the public later. Yes, I know all you folks that came to this episode because it was a continuation of my comments about Guns N' Roses and Faith No More and Soundgarden are just chomping at the bit for some recommendations on Lauryn Hill, aren't you? And hey, this is a good time to remind you that I do have a presence on Twitter for the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. It's at Rock Film Rock. You can just search for the full name, the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, on Twitter as well. I post, maybe once or twice a week, but if you want to give me feedback on the show, it's certainly welcome there, unless you just want to call in right now. And may I take this time to also remind you that if you go to the description of this episode and click on the link tree, it will take you to different methods in which you could support this show. Doesn't have to be money, although it can be. You could buy a shirt with a wacky slogan of some kind on it that I put on there. It says something to the effect of, with God's help, I may just die on the way to the toilet today, or one with a guitar pedal on it and some very cute lettering about what it means to be a musician and play music. I hope there are designs there in the future. I'm right now dealing with something at bonfire.com where I have the t-shirt designs hosted and for sale. And I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out with them in the future. I might have to go to Redbubble or TeePublic or something like that. We'll see. But you can also follow me on Instagram, which is a way of supporting, or just tell somebody you know about the show. Tell them you like it. Tell them what you like about it. Give them a link to a show, an episode you liked. Criminy, I've been watching this damn map on UPS.com all day because I got a guitar coming my way, and it was to be delivered between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. And I know that's not exact, but I work at home, and I've been staying home since 2 p.m. and not leaving and not going anywhere for lunch and not going to run errands, not going to the gym. And now it's 6:36 p.m. and it's this little icon of a truck has been bouncing around my neighborhood for the better part of the last 5 goddamn hours. And it's almost there. It's always almost there. And then it just branches off. I mean, I used to work dispatch for a courier company. I know how this stuff works. I know you gotta organize your deliveries in the way that makes the most sense to you that day so you can get in the neighborhood and out the neighborhood and back on the freeway when you're delivering your last package. And I live close to the freeway, so I get it. Probably one of his last stops in this area. But it's a guitar. I want to play it. I want to unbox it. And it came all the way from Florida. So up here in the Northwest, that's a long trek. Takes a while to get. I probably have too many guitars. I've been teaching lessons to my nephew, who just turned 16, and he's now got his own guitar that I went and hunted down on reverb.com. I also went to a bunch of stores in the area. And I'm telling you, folks, if you've got a kid that needs a guitar or a student or a friend that wants the first guitar they've ever had, do not let them skimp. I am a luthier. I've built guitars. I've fixed 1 billion guitars in the last 22 years. And you do not skimp on the quality of the build, because then you'll just spend lots of money on repairs for something. It's like a house. It's a money pit if you pick the wrong one. Plan to spend at least $200 minimum, but for $200, you're going to get something really good if you do your homework or find someone else to do the homework for you. Really happy with what the kid got, and his Uncle Paul got him not that Uncle Paul, got him an amplifier, so he's all ready to go. I can take back my gear that I've been using to teach him with. He's obsessed with Van Halen. I'm telling you all this for a couple of reasons. One, there's promise out there for the youth. Nobody forced this kid to listen to Van Halen. He found it all on his own. I assume around the time that Eddie Van Halen passed away, he must have been checking out the stories and looking up YouTube footage of who that person was and got blown away by it. And he is a fantastic player who works really hard, and he practices, and he is going to earn, all the money that his family spent on that new guitar back for sure. And over the course of the last year, I've been letting him use multiple guitars of mine so he can get the feel for what he likes and make a choice as to what sort of body shape and neck, of the guitar works best for him. He settled on the Fender Stratocaster, but I let him borrow a Telecaster, my Gibson Sonex, my Gibson SG, and, he changed his mind a couple times. It's important to let kids, try a few different things before they tell you what they need. Right? Because there's a lot of pressure there to make a decision too soon and to stop bothering mom and dad or whoever it is that's going to shell out the money for this guitar. Now, he probably is under the impression that I have a lot of guitars at home, and he'd be right, but I have more than he thinks I do. But I can only imagine a scenario that he's talking to his cousins about this, and maybe his cousins talk to their friends about this, and in true crime movie gone terribly wrong, like Fargo kind of fashion. Like, somebody write this movie, please, and then give me credit and give me points on it. Like a guitar version of Fargo or any other heist movie where things go terribly wrong and people betray each other and murder each other. Like I bet there's these teenagers that would hatch a scheme to like break into my place and steal my guitars when I'm away, and I'll get murdered by their dumb friends who, don't know me in some crazy accident. Like one of the kids knows his dad has a gun, so they bring it and, like in Stand By Me, and he doesn't think it's loaded. He's checked it multiple times, and he never notices that there's like one bullet in the chamber because he doesn't know that the night before, just like she does every week, his mom was playing Russian roulette with the gun, and she was holding the gun to her head, but not like directly at her temple or in her mouth, like just sort of at an angle, at like a diagonal, maybe 30 to 45 degree angle. But she's pretending she's not. She's pretending like she's just too weak to hold it because she kind of doesn't want to go through with it. But she thinks maybe if she lives, then that'll be recognized as the cry for help that she needs it to be and get her the sort of sympathy and attention and treatment she needs. Though who can say what she really needs? Who can say? Certainly not her. And she's got no one to talk to about it because, the dad's Saturday night, he's out at a bar or a bowling alley yelling at a TV while drinking 15 Coronas. And she's at home spinning that what do you call the little chamber thing? The not the barrel, the spinny part, the cylindrical part that holds the bullets. Yeah, I know. It's a cylinder. I grew up with guns. But it's nice to annoy people that are obsessed with guns. No, that's not what it's called. She spins it like she does every weekend when she's alone. And she pulls the trigger, and there's a click. And she's all bummed out, but simultaneously thrilled she gets to live. And maybe tomorrow she'll turn things around for herself and leave her dumb family. She looks in the chamber and sees that one bullet was one more trigger pull away from being right down the center, lined right up, ready to take her life. Maybe. But she knows rules are rules. It's what keeps us a society, people. Those boundaries are what provide the little shred of sanity we all need to hang on to. To hang on to our version of reality with a vice-like grip. You grit your teeth and you get back out there. She puts the gun back in the dresser drawer. And the kid's name is probably Justin, and he's the one that the rest of the friends don't entirely trust. Like there's always something kind of off about him. Like he's always the one that says something a little more off kilter and without context than the rest. And maybe he's the one when they're all hanging out and like sharing one beer that they convince someone to buy that says something apropos of nothing that indicates a strange home life. You know what I mean? Like Justin's the one that's always saying stuff that kind of shakes everybody up a little bit. And they're like, did he really fucking say that? And then they try to play it off like it's no big deal, like it's not really weird. Because they like hanging out at Justin's house. Not because there's a gun there. They don't know about the gun until Justin shows up with it at my place. But like his parents are the ones that actually buy the good ice cream when they're sleepovers, and they have like the good, not good, but the cereal that the kids like in the morning that their parents won't buy them because their parents are a little too health conscious, maybe a little too uptight, and they don't approve of some of those more sugary kind of cereals. They don't want to mess up a good thing with Justin, but there is always something about him that seems a little bit off, you know? And it all falls apart because Justin shoots me. Justin shoots me after the teenagers break into my place to steal my guitars. Because they think I've got a lot of money because I have multiple guitars. Because when I was a teenager, I had a guitar teacher who had like multiple guitars and like a rack system in his basement. I went to a party at their band house in downtown Renton in the Highlands, and it was a New Year's Eve party, and my best friend's mom was dating the singer in the band, and the guitarist was my guitar teacher for a short time when I asked my parents for guitar lessons for Christmas. And me and my best friend were there overnight when all these adults were partying down in the basement with like a red light on and playing live music. And then in the morning we got up and Rick, the aforementioned boyfriend, aforementioned in a previous episode about the name Starr, Mike Starr, and Alice in Chains, and Starr, the character from The Lost Boys, portrayed by the same actress who was the female lead in the movie Crossroads, which I did an episode about in that episode. That boyfriend of that mom of that best friend of mine gets up and puts on Black Sabbath's Paranoid for the first time I ever heard it. Changed everything. Of course, I would have heard Black Sabbath's Paranoid at some point, but thank you, Rick, for putting it on when I was 15 years old. Actually, it wasn't New Year's Eve. Maybe it was. I forget. It was. I know that the Super Bowl was on the next day. That seems a bit early. New Year's Day seems a bit early for the Super Bowl. Anyhow, these teenagers think I've got a lot of money, and they're really bummed out when they get to my place, and it's just like a shitty bachelor pad with lots of junk in it. And they realize that like they'd be a lot better off like trying to steal someone's iPhone or iPad and not, heavy clunky gear. But they don't know much about, this is like that movie Suicide Kings, one of those, or Snatch, where these amateurs try to be all criminal minded because they think they're smarter than criminals. Same thing with like Office Space. And they're like, what could go wrong? We'll just say we're friends of Jay's nephew who he's teaching lessons to, and we want to have lessons too. But I surprise them accidentally because I come out with like my samurai sword that my good friend Nick gave me for my birthday about 11 years ago, and I have never had a chance to use it except for on a big, huge rat that was in my kitchen one time at a different location, not this place. But I stabbed a rat with a samurai sword, and it's not like it's sharp. It's just one of those mall, you buy it at the mall samurai swords. It's very blunt, but it's pokey, pointy at the end. Stuck him with it, and went, and I twisted it, killed him. And I'm probably figuring I'm going to grab it, and I'm just going to go down swinging in my own place, or maybe the flash of the blade will scare off whoever I can hear has broken into my place, right? And or even better, maybe I just come out of the bathroom holding the samurai sword, and God knows what I was doing in there by myself with it. That would be an even better story. And Justin's ready with the gun, and he's like showing the guys. He's like, no, look, you can look at the back of, the cartridge thing. You can see there's no bullets in it because there's one. It's moved its way into the chamber. It's moved its way, lined up with the barrel, and it's ready to fire. And like he freaks out and squeezes the trigger, and it like even though he's holding it kind of low, like the recoil of it and the fear in his body makes him sort of spasm a little bit, and it shoots high, and it's enough to like get me right in the torso, right in the chest. So that way it doesn't go, it tears into me, but it's not like bouncing through walls or going into someone else's, home or anything, or going out the window. It stays mostly in that room because it slows down after it goes through me, and then it hits the wall. And it gets lodged in a stud in the wall. And he's like, he's freaking out. And his friends are freaking out because they're like, well, we had to include Justin in the stuff that, they normally don't want to, but they still like want to be able to hang out at his house. And if Justin finds out that we didn't include him in this little heist, then he won't let us sleep over and eat the good cereal and stuff and eat the pizza rolls for dinner and watch all the dirty movies that his parents don't care if he watches when we're around. It all falls apart after he shoots me. They're like, Justin, what the hell, man? We're supposed to be in and out, no complications. We don't need this kind of heat, man. And Justin would be all, he came out of nowhere, you guys. That was fucked up. He had no right doing that. I was in fear for my life. He came right at me. And that's when they all take a look at each other in a split-second mind meld that Justin's not involved in. They look each other in the eyes and think, do we feed Justin to the cops, or do we escape with these guitars and figure it all out later? And I think we all know what they'll do. They'll rat him out. Justin goes downriver, and they all will get implicated, but they won't serve hard time like he did. They'll say Justin was the ringleader. Justin threatened them. They're all under 18. They know. They know enough. They know enough to bond together and make sure all their stories line up and match. perfectly. Justin's going to have to go away. That's too bad. But hey, they're not the ones that brought a gun, okay? It was supposed to be easy. Supposed to be just jimmying the door open. Getting in and out really fast. Justin had to go off. He was a loose cannon, if you will. Look in his eyes. You never could tell what he was going to do next. It was very intimidating, Justin. Oh shit, the guitar's here. The UPS truck map says he's not even at my door, but someone's at my door. God damn it. I'm going to go get my guitar. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. Let's try this out. This is a gold, metallic gold. Hagstrom Viking that someone has replaced the internal wiring with, old school style. I think he said I'll have to look up the information again from the sales page, but it's like old timey oil and paper capacitors and really standard old school 50s wiring and the normal potentiometers, not the push-pull pots that they come with. I guess he wanted that, but also like Gretsch electromatic pickups. They look like the old school Gretsch Filtertrons, not the TV Jones ones that are the kind of thing I usually expect, and not the knockoffs that I buy from Guitar Fetish that I love. Hello, Guitar Fetish, or anyone that likes their stuff. I haven't checked the tuning or anything. I just unboxed it and I plugged it into my little interface and my Moore preamp live pedal that you heard in other places on this. The parts where I was doing all the whammy bar, butt rock, hair metal sounding stuff. Here we go. Very vintage specific, right? Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad I used that high gain sound on this hollow body, electromatic-y, Gretschy, kind of old timey guitar? Wow, that's out of tune. Bonus points for everybody that recognizes that song from Last Action Hero that I just played a little riff from. Let's try let's get some tuningness happening. Yeah. Ooh. Everything's a bit sharp except for that G. That's worse. That's way worse. Hang on, let's get this right here. Let me stop. That was probably a really bad mangling of a wonderful Living Color riff from 1993 that I love. I don't think I've ever tried to play it. So anyway, thanks for being here for me getting a guitar. I'm sure you'll hear it on future episodes as well. I'm sure I will try to weasel it into an Instagram video or two. Maybe I'll do some YouTube stuff soon with the guitar to demo, how to play certain songs. Let's us talk about a couple other things that didn't make it into the Audio Slave Vanishing Point episode. One is just a little extra from the Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Faith No More touring era. But first, I want to get into a little poll that I put up on the Facebookie back when I was coming up with notes for this episode, which was months and months and months ago. And I asked my friends while I was revisiting Vanishing Point, what are the movies that you can think of that have a similar sort of plot device, in that there is a DJ at a radio station communicating with one of the main characters for good or for ill, I suppose, where it's not just a one scene thing, but like a major component of the plot. Turns out it's a bigger trope than I realized. So you want to check out the list with me? Because my friends are smart people and they know stuff. So, out of the 51 comments I got in response, I'll read to you what I think might be the most relevant, but aren't the Warriors and aren't Vanishing Point. I prefaced it with that. So we start at the top with Do the Right Thing. Samuel L. Jackson is the DJ in that one. Not against a protagonist per se, but in Pump Up the Volume, Hard Harry uses his radio platform to express his somewhat contrarian views. Plus, it's got a cool soundtrack, someone says. Let's see. Iggy Pop on the movie Hardware. And Hardware, I know, was mentioned in the Future Shock documentary about 2000 AD, the British comic book company series, the anthology series of various different characters and ideas, and there was a story in 2000 AD that was ripped off to make the movie Hardware, and then the makers and producers of Hardware sued the comic book guy who originated the story in order to basically bully him into giving up the rights to something he'd created. That's all I know about Hardware, besides the little snippets I've seen from it. Let's see. Good Morning Vietnam, Car Wash, Frequency with Dennis Quaid, a ham radio. The Fog. Someone said, I feel like Adrienne Barbeau might have sent messages from the DJ booth at some point in the film. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. My good friend Stacy from the band Furniture Girls. This one's for you, Lefty. She also said Love and Monsters, Night of the Comet. Let's see, what else? My friend Bill Fountain has a few. American Graffiti, The Boat That Rocked, Pirate Radio is good for DJ shenanigans. Dear White People, he says as well. Hollywood Nights, my friend Danny says, for Wolfman Jack is in that one. I got to check that out. We got to talk about Wolfman Jack. There was a cartoon in the 80s featuring Wolfman Jack, but it was like in a futuristic fantasy otherworld of some kind, and I only saw it once on a VHS tape that a friend of mine let me borrow for a while. Like when he was living in another state or some place where they got TV shows that I didn't see. Let's see. Wolfman Jack. 80s cartoon. Because Wolfman Jack I thought was a 50s guy, but not at all. He was a 70s guy, but he was they used his voice in... No, I take it back. I'm sorry. I got to stop myself here. I thought he was a 70s guy for a long time, but I realized after doing the Doors episode that he goes back a little earlier than that. But in the 80s, if you were a kid, you thought Wolfman Jack was like a staple of 50s hit, like rock and roll radio, more so than he actually would have been because of these like certain cartoons and because he was in American Graffiti, which takes place at the early part of the 60s. Anyways, Wolf Rock TV is a 1984 American animated series produced by Deke Enterprises and Dick Clark Productions, featuring the voice of Wolfman Jack. It had 7 whole episodes on ABC before it was canceled due to low ratings. Damn, dude. I gotta find this. Wolfman hosts a rock music TV program with 3 teenagers, Sarah, Sonny, and Ricardo, while playing some real live-action music videos. That's a big thing in the 80s that they can't do, and they couldn't put out on DVD, even if you did like it well enough to like demand it and sign a petition for it. Never going to happen. There's a lot of stuff in the 80s, like Alvin and the Chipmunks did this all the time. They would straight up just play songs that were popular. They are popular on the radio and MTV, and they would just put them on cartoons. The Chipmunks would re-record them with their own vocals, of course, but that's still an intellectual property. That's still a publishing hassle if you were going to, ever replay that. I'm sure a ton of artists in the 80s, or whoever, was cheating them out of their money, made a ton of dough from this. So let's see. They had a parrot named Bopper also appeared as the comic relief pet. They had a manager, Mr. Morris, who shows dislike towards the kind of music that Jack showcases. Ooh. A segment was Wolf Rock News, and another was the Rock and Roll Museum with live action interviews. That's a lot of padding for an animated series. I hope it didn't cost too much. The plot episodes are titled The Video Nappers, Bad News Birds, Bopper Goes Ape, The Nerds Who Fell to Earth, No Time for Sarge, Rock and Robot, and Wolfman's Granny. Holy shit, do I have to track these down and review them for this series of podcasts, don't I? I do. You won't let me get away with not doing that, would you? You wouldn't let me just coast and throw that at you and then I would never follow up again? Yeah, I thought so. All right, let's get back to the list. So let's see where I was on the list. Jay Whitecotton, I think, said Pontypool. Jay Whitecotton is a comedian in Austin, Texas. Check him out. So I should actually highlight that for myself. And then Hollywood Nights. I did a quick search on YouTube. Wolf Rock TV, no go, no nothing. No footage, unfortunately. Let's see. The Vast of Night, a new one, yeah. The Fog, another vote for The Fog, another vote for Hollywood Nights. Ham Radio, Smokey and the Bandit, nope, I'm saying that's disqualified. Someone said Hooper and Frequency. American Graffiti, Wolfman Jack, Texas Chainsaw 2 again. And someone said, Six String Samurai, a movie I'm going to have to cover later. I haven't decided who I'm going to link to it musically. Could be a Buddy Holly episode, but there's the Buddy Holly story for that. I mean, the main character looks like Buddy Holly. His name's Buddy. But probably more of a surf rock episode maybe. But there's a lot of 50s stuff that has surf music in it that might be good for me to review. Let's see. 50s, movies and stuff. Let's see. Trashy TV, Z Nation. Skip third season or critique it for the racist plot. Interesting. Play Misty for me, Clint Eastwood. Yep. Talk Radio. I said, was that with Dolly? And I was like, oh, no, that's Straight Talk. Never mind. Another vote for Pump Up the Volume. All right, that rounds it out. I'm happy to say that while searching for Wolf Rock TV, I found the first 2-3 seasons of a show from 1987 called Werewolf that I've been wanting to revisit ever since I was a kid and it came out. That show, it was basically like The Incredible Hulk, but if The Incredible Hulk was a werewolf instead and like a much younger guy than Bill Bixby. But I thought he was awesome because he got bit by his friend and he shot his friend with a silver bullet to kill him, even though his friend warned him that he was going to have to shoot him with a silver bullet because he's going to turn into a werewolf. And he's like, no, you're not. That's crazy talk. And then he does, and he bites him and he shoots the guy. And now he's guilty of his best friend's murder, and he's got to he's got to travel from town to town to escape the cops that are investigating him. And he's got a pentagram burned into his hand that he can't get rid of. It itches, I think, if I remember right, like when the full moon comes out, or when it's close. I think. I don't remember. I do remember there's one episode in a small town where he meets a priest and becomes friends with him and tries to get help from this priest to sort of protect him from the evil that's inside. Turns out the priest is a werewolf as well, and they have a big knockdown, drag-out fight. At least in my memory, maybe it only lasted 3 seconds, in the church, and he impales the priest on a cross in his own church. It was amazing. It's 87, and I was 9 years old. I'm obsessed with monsters after that, especially werewolves. I basically wanted to be a werewolf when I grew up from that point on, and I don't think it's ever changed. didn't hurt that Seth Green came along in 97 or 98 on Buffy the Vampire Slayer playing a guy who was a werewolf that was a guitarist in a rock band and had a super cute girlfriend. That was it. That's everything I wanted to be when I grew up. Magical. Now, we're not done with Faith No More today. We're not done with Metallica today. I'm going to get into that next. Ooh, yeah. Settle in. Get a snack. Dance around. Get ready for more. This is going to be fun. Somebody call my mama. Somebody call my mama. Now let's get back to some Faith No More quotes that I didn't have time to put in the last episode, but I really wanted to. I just, you know, it's an 8.5, hour ep, so I could only do so much. But I don't think I have a Faith No More movie coming up that I can link them to necessarily. A little Bill and Ted 2, I suppose. I want to get these out now, though. I don't want to wait. I don't want to forget about them. So I'm reading a bunch of stuff straight out of faithnomorefollowers.com. The stories became more outrageous. Billy heard Axl, Billy Gould, bassist for FNM, heard Axl hired an exorcist because he believed he was possessed and by the spirit of the dead AC/DC singer Bon Scott. Roddy Bottom, keyboard player, sampled Axl's voice and would play it during the Faith No More set. Like, you hit a little note on the keyboard and go, beep, you hit what's supposed to sound like cats singing Jingle Bell, bingo, meow, meow, meow. And it's like Axl saying something that you recorded without him knowing about it. Or maybe it was from an album he sampled, who knows. Patton's toilet antics became legendary. Pouring urine over his head whilst stood on Axl's monitor, threatening to crap on said monitor. Take a shit on top of these TV screens in front of tens of thousands of people, and basically crapping wherever he could. The most infamous story involving Axl's orange juice now debunked. We had fun bringing those images to the mainstream, but the Axl carton story wasn't true. The orange juice carton story of Mike Patton taking a shit in a carton of orange juice that belonged to Axl and putting it back in the fridge in the green room. In the end, all the taunts aimed at Axl were in good fun. Maybe not for the GNR singer himself, but certainly for Faith No More. Being able to talk shit in the press and have people read it, a lot of people read it, that was really fun. That was how we got our amusement. We like to create dissension. It was this gigantic body of people that travel just like some big circus, where no one ever really communicates with each other. We thought that if we stir it up just enough to where we wouldn't get in trouble, it might make it more interesting. After all, it's kind of uncool when a band invites you on tour and you diss them a little bit just to have some fun. When is this interview going to be printed? You see, I have to watch what I say. But hey, fuck that. Just print this. I hate the whole circus thing. We all hate it. But at the moment, we don't have the power to do what we want to do, so we still have to eat a little bit of shit. We almost have the power to control what we do, but not quite. So we're just gritting our teeth and getting through it the best we can. Every band in the world might think they want to open for Guns N' Roses, but let me tell you, it's been a real ugly personal experience having to deal with all the shit that surrounds this fucking circus. I've always hated that aspect of rock music, and I've never wanted to be part of it. So to find myself being associated with this tour kind of sucks. Billy Gould, 1992. I'm getting more and more confused about who's in Guns N' Roses, and it's blowing my mind. There's like Dizzy and Iggy and Lizzie and Tizzy and Gilby and Giddy. Shit, man, on stage down, there's like a horn section, 2 chick backup singers, 2 keyboard players, an airline pilot, a basketball coach, a couple of car mechanics. Keyboard player Roddy Bottum, 1992. If it hadn't gone on as long, it would have been okay. But we did it for about 6 months, Billy Gould says. It got to be like this was our life. It's like working in a job with people you don't understand and who don't understand you. We were smart aleck, obnoxious people, Roddy Bottum says. We shit all over that camp. We had to prove that we weren't that. It makes you examine yourself, Mike Patton says. Is this who we are now? This isn't my deal. You overdo it sometimes. There I am, peeing on Axl Rose's teleprompter. I really didn't have to do that. Now, let's go to a bit of Metallica documentation. Now, before I get into the Metallica narrative written by Mick Wall, I realized that I forgot to mention one other extra fun note on the Guns N' Roses audio slave, the Vanishing Point episode. I did mention the song My World, the last track on Use Your Illusion 2. You know, the one that goes, you are walking in my world, a socio-psychotic state of bliss. And it sounds like Corey Feldman in Lost Boys. Good night, bloodsucker. Which would be then later appropriated by Dave Mustaine's, brain to be his whole vocal delivery in Sweating Bullets, Even though he hated Guns N' Roses with a passion publicly. Oh, they're so awful. Those Guns N' Roses fellows. By the way, I'm going to, but water inside my head won't take a day off. I'll be dead. Corey Feldman, Axl Rose, Dave Mustaine, same guy. So back to Mick Wall of Kerrang! As Axl would say in Get in the Ring. In his book, Enter Night, a biography of Metallica, which is a great bio to read. If you have read or don't want to read the more authorized style bios or the older bios from the 90s, I would say if you want some real deep info on Metallica, maybe not a definitive timeline story, check out Mick Wall's book, Enter Night, and check out And Justice for All by Joel McIver. A lot of great info and a lot of great insight that gets left out of some of the other narratives. Or as the French say, narratives. It's interesting to me that he kind of blows through a couple of things pretty quickly before the Guns N' Roses part of the story. Guns N' Roses factors into the book earlier on in the 80s and stuff. But when it comes to the tour that we've discussed in the previous episode of the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, it comes after talking about the Grammy win for like one paragraph and then one paragraph about the Concert for Life experience for Freddie Mercury playing in Wembley Stadium. So, if you watched a year and a half in the life of Metallica on video, you've seen way more coverage of what's in the book. And maybe Mick Wall kind of knew that. Maybe that's why he decided to keep it short. Maybe there were other books that he felt covered it pretty extensively and he didn't really have anything to say about it. I do like this book for a lot of its insights into the people in the band because Mick Wall knew them when he was a journalist, a rock journalist at Kerrang! Mick Wall at Kerrang! In the 80s and 90s. So he saw Metallica first. I think there's parts in here, if I remember correctly, I haven't read this in a couple of years, but I just picked it back up again for this episode. I think there's parts where they're like sleeping on his floor at some point during a European tour. Or maybe it was just like they were just sleeping it off after he went out to drinks with them for an interview or something. And I like the way he gets into it. I like the language he uses here in this section. So I am going to just read straight off the page of Enter Night, page 342. Then in May, so this is the next part after playing the Concert for Life Freddie Mercury tribute. Lars and Slash, which featured obviously both Guns N' Roses and Metallica, co-hosted a special press conference at the Gaslight in Hollywood, where it was announced that Guns N' Roses and Metallica would co-headline a U.S. tour together that summer. On paper, it looked like a snug fit. The Metallica album had only just vacated number one when Guns N' Roses had issued their latest release, the two double albums released simultaneously titled Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2. The latter had swiftly followed Metallica, the album, to number one, while the former had also become hinged to the U.S. top 5. 8 months on, combined American sales of the three albums were now topping 10 million. Guns N' Roses and Metallica on the same ticket together would be the largest, most lucrative concert draw of the year. Not if Axl Rose has anything to do with it. That's my comment. That's not Mick Wall's comment, but we know that because we listened to the last episode, right? Mick notes that it would also become one of the most incident-filled and controversial tours ever. The brainchild, almost inevitably, of the Axl-besotted Lars. As former Guns N' Roses manager Alan Niven says now, as much as I love Metallica, I would just go to hear Seek and Destroy and hope for Orion. I thought the idea of them touring with Guns N' Roses was absolutely absurd and a recipe for some kind of disaster. Who follows who, for one thing? It's insane to forget. It's better to be a hard act to follow than to follow a hard act. Sounds kind of cocky there. I think Metallica, in the fullness of time, proved that wasn't an issue. And he's looking back years later. I think you might be full of it, Alan Niven. Maybe Axl's right about you, Alan Niven. But, you know, I think Izzy sided with Alan, so I'm siding with Alan in the Guns N' Roses management split. Anyways, he says, Niven also found it most uncomfortable to be sitting in Duff's bathroom one night with Lars and company, all gacked to the gills, planning their onslaught on the world. How am I going to get around this one, I wondered, and half thought to drop Lars off at the Hollywood Sheriff's Station in his blithering condition, ranting about the enormity of the sonic blitzkrieg, his arms waving expansively in the big windows of the Range Rover as I tried to quietly and unobtrusively slip down a trafficless pre-dawn Sunset Boulevard instead of at his hotel, which I reluctantly did as the cold gray light of day came up. He adds wearily, God bless cocaine and the idiocies it induces. In fact, the running order was the least of anybody's worries, with it agreed early on that Metallica, although billed as co-headliner and splitting the proceeds 50-50 with GNR, would go on first by simple dint of the fact. By this stage, Axl Rose was keeping audiences waiting for up to 3 hours most nights of the tour. As Slash said, Metallica was not a band to pull that kind of shit at all, so they wisely opted to play first so as to avoid being pulled down by our bullshit. Now, in that last episode, I took the tour from various points of view at various times over the course of 8 hours. So you got, a little Skid Row impression of what was going on, a little Soundgarden impression of what was going on. I think it's good to take Mick Wall's kind of summary here for this next part of introducing what the vibe was like and what the situation was like for the 25-date stadium tour. Axl was at the height of his megalomaniacal fame to his usual on-tour retinue of chiropractor, masseuse, vocal coach, bodyguard, driver, personal assistant, PR, manager, and a gaggle of hangers-on masquerading as friends. He now added a psychotherapist, Susie London, and a professional psychic named Sharon Maynard, a short, middle-aged Asian woman nicknamed Yoda by the rest of the band, after the mystic goblin in Star Wars, whose specialties included channeling past lives, communicating with extraterrestrials, and utilizing the power of crystals. Sure enough, Metallica would go on stage each night, bang on time, and Guns N' Roses wouldn't. Sometimes because Axl genuinely had throat problems, oftentimes because he was still psyching himself up back at the hotel. The energy might not be right, the vibes all muddled, or Yoda would simply advise him against it. 10 days into the tour, at Giant Stadium in Rutherford, New Jersey, Axl was struck in the genitals by a cigarette lighter thrown from the audience. He hurled down the mic, tore off the white cowboy hat he had been wearing, and hobbled to the side stage wings where he tried to catch his breath. A chant went up among the crowd, Axl, Axl, Axl. Then the house lights came on, and it became clear the show was over. The next 3 shows in Boston, Columbia, and Minneapolis were all canceled. The official explanation, severe damage to Axl's vocal cords. The real reason, humiliation, fury, hubris, only Axl really knew. I do have a segment from an interview with Axl about this very topic that I want to put in here. I didn't have time to put it in the main episode, but I thought it was worthwhile. I think it gives you a little bit where his head was at the time, you know, on the Get in the Ring tour, when he's out there getting in the ring, being fighting people that aren't there, critics. If you saw the last or heard the last episode, Jesus Christ, what's wrong with me? So if you read the facts, FAX, that I shared on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, that Axl sent to that Indiana music critic from the local paper, you know what I'm talking about. And of course, his tirades, you know, against various music journalists. For him, I'm sure these weren't just concerts. This was like a match.
Folks, there's Jumpin' Jeff Farmer. Jeff, a while back, what a match you had with Motley.
Yep. Probably the hardest match I ever had in my life. But I don't like it when things aren't going my way.
There you have it, folks. At least the man's honest. Now, I'll read a little bit more from this book, but then I'll move on to some more historical rock concert disastrousness. I like how it gives you sort of a encapsulation of where Metallica's heads are at this time. And in particular, hijinks backstage with the Guns N' Roses camp because, you know, as Slash recalled, Axl was out to impress Metallica and everyone else, having backstage parties every single night, which was obviously a big miscalculation with Faith No More, with Soundgarden, with Metallica. That's got to be man. I remember seeing Ice-T at a public speaking engagement where he talked about touring with Metallica and Guns N' Roses when he was in Body Count on that tour. And he said, man, Guns N' Roses knew how to live. He's like, they did it right. They had strip parties every single night, you know, with a different theme, and they would just get strippers at every location to come backstage, and we had the time of our lives. It was a blast. Obviously, Metallica, Faith No More, some of them not so much. Each day, I guess Axl sends like his step siblings that are on the tour with them out with a big old check to put together something special for that evening's after-show entertainment. Matt Sorum says, we spent $100,000 a night on parties. One night would be Greek night, 4 greased-up, muscle-bound guys carrying in a roast pig. Another night might be 60s night with like lava lamps and psychedelic light shows and slogans spray-painted everywhere. Acid is groovy, kill the pigs. And the author notes the only concert would be a free bar, several pinball machines, pool tables, hot tubs, and strippers dancing on tables. According to Roddy Bottom, keyboardist for Faith No More, who opened the show on a handful of dates, there were more strippers than road crew. For a while, Lars was in his element, says Mick Wall, still doing large amounts of cocaine most days, sporting the replica of Axl's white leather jacket he'd had made. His was a regular face at all these after-show parties. It was like we're in Indianapolis, he recalled, so there were Formula One cars everywhere, with all the girls dressed up in pit crew uniforms. It was decadence at the highest level I'd seen, a Caligula kind of outlandishness. Were there orgies? Sure. Was I involved? Yes. Well, I was in the same room. We'll leave it at that. Longtime Metallica photographer Ross Halfin has a quote in here where he says, when they were taking a band photo in Jacksonville. Lars is wearing the white leather jacket. And Halfin goes, the band stood behind him making signs of the cross. James in particular was getting seriously bugged. James said the GNR tour was very extravagant, which is so un-me. The hot tubs backstage. I'd go back and drink their beer and shoot pool. That's what I'd do. By the time they'd come off stage, I'd be gone, so I didn't have to hang out with them. And if you take James Hetfield's quotes about this time seriously, it just sounds to him like Lars is going through another phase. Other musicians that have been around Metallica have said similar things. You know, Lars kind of goes from enthusiastically goes from like one thing to another thing. Different kinds of music, different kinds of art, different sort of business projects that hold his attention for a little while, and then he moves on. I think he's just one of those seriously motivated individuals that, you know, needs to focus on new stuff all the time after he's sort of, you know, taken it all in. I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally. I think it's admirable. I wish I was that way more often. But James said, Guns N' Roses were part of the enemy. Lars was out there in the white leather jacket and all that, posing up a storm. Lars is that way. He will be infatuated with certain people in his life and need to get into them. That's just part of him, I guess. He likes learning things from people who have that something. Axl had that. When the tour was over, apparently Lars didn't see Axl again for nearly 15 years. And Lars himself said, Axl was two people. You were truly left wondering what the fuck was going to happen next. When he was in a good mood, he was the sweetest guy. And when he forgot to take his medicine or decided to go off, he was kind of a freak. He was the last person I've ever seen, though besides maybe Bill Clinton, that when he walked into a room, every single person was drawn to him. That's a rare thing. Now let's talk about disastrous rock shows. Let's talk about Altamont. Let's talk about the book by Joel Selvin. I can't remember if I touched on some of the work in this in the 60s episode that says, you know, story time in the title. I know I read straight from Hunter S. Thompson's Hell's Angels. I might have read a little bit from this. Mostly I got this book to get more into the Graham Parsons element of the story with the Rolling Stones. At least that's why I got it from the library initially. And then I read more of the book and I just fell in love with it. So I finally bought it. I bought a very nicely, hardly used copy. And it's worth every penny. If you want a good rock and roll book about the 60s, man, I don't recommend just going with the book that says it's about the 60s. I recommend reading Joel Selvin's Altamont because it's a day-for-day, hour-for-hour account of the planning stages through the execution stages through the aftermath of the concert and the lasting effects it had, including every single person involved, which means the Rolling Stones and everyone they hung out with. So you get scenes of, you know, Jimi Hendrix and scenes of Janis Joplin and the Flying Burrito Brothers and, you know, the Stones, obviously themselves, Grateful Dead, anyone involved in promoting rock music in the San Francisco area at the time, including a program director from a local radio station. Now, I understand if you're used to the other normal format of my shows, you know, this episode's getting to be a bit like, you know, rock and roll story time straight from the books, right? Well, I don't mean for it to be that way, but I also want to turn you on to some good writing because I spent so much of the last episode with Guns N' Roses and stuff shitting on the author of one of the books I was researching. So I feel justified in doing this because, number one, it's fun for me to read audiobook narration style stuff. Number two, I'm not advertising this as an audiobook. I'm not going on YouTube. I'm not saying this is an Altamont audiobook as if it's authorized by the author. And it's not taking away from the author. I'm hoping you buy his publications, right? When I like the way someone constructs their narrative, and when I like the way they present things, I would rather not interpret it in my own words. I think that would do them a disservice in this case if I have the freedom, which I do, to just read you straight from this book as well as, what I did from Mick Wall. This is a section of the book towards the last third of it. We're talking Post-Altamont disaster. We're talking a radio station called KSAN. A gentleman by the name of Pontick, who had attended Woodstock himself, spent the day at Altamont, issued occasional reports. He'd seen firsthand what was going on, initially trying to stay upbeat and optimistic, but gradually turning to more distressed accounts as the day wore on. Most of the KSAN staff on the scene had dropped acid. Pontick, who didn't, still managed to press the wrong button on his tape recorder and record the broadcast of a local top 40 radio station rather than his own comments he made while the Rolling Stones played. I love that setup right away. I love that just reminds me of the part of Helter Skelter where the police that arrived on the scene when the first murder weapon was found by a little boy, the first thing they did was, first of all, walk all over the scene, messing it up with their footprints. And second, pick up the pistol they were handed by a little boy who'd found it by the handle, by the grip, getting their fingerprints on the grip of the pistol and the trigger guard, where the boy had seen enough episodes of Dragnet or other cop shows that were on at the time to know that when you find a gun laying around, you pick it up just with two fingers by one edge of like the trigger guard. So you're not messing up the fingerprints that would be left. And they would go on I believe it's LAPD officers that would arrive at the Tate house later and would go on to mess up a lot of the evidence with their own bungling. Same time frame. Altamont's probably one of the last times that people still pick up hitchhikers, especially long-haired ones, because Charles Manson ruined that for everybody. People stopped picking up hitchhikers almost overnight after the Tate LaBianca murders. Now people are, pointing fingers a day after the show as far as who's responsible for all the, destruction and death and the bad planning and everything. And Pontick had planned to produce a 4-hour special Sunday night for the station that he worked for. As he got to work on Sunday, he was buoyed by other KSAN staffers in the booth, and he began to mix pre-recorded interviews, on-air guests, and phone calls from the audience. The whole city listened. I could listen to that all day, man. That would be amazing. Especially if you were in the area and didn't really know exactly what had happened. You just saw maybe a headline in the paper the next day or something. With more than enough blame to go around, the effort to parse Altamont's wreckage for answers had officially begun. During his call, Cutler, being Sam Cutler of Black Hill Enterprises, which was a promotions company that put on sort of like renegade rock shows in a fairly unusual manner from time to time, who was one of the organizers. Cutler sounded phlegmatic and distant, drained. Told Pontick he wanted the station to put out an urgent appeal for volunteers with their transportation to come to Altamont and help deal with what he estimated was 30 tons of garbage, thousands of sleeping bags and blankets, tens of thousands of broken jugs of Red Mountain wine. I personally feel that the violence and only a small amount of the people here were involved. I think that the violence was regrettable, said Cutler. I think there were a number of factors contributing to it, not the least of which was our having to get the show together at the last minute. We had no time. We had to trust people. Still, he did not offer any strong criticism of the Hells Angels. I myself feel that the Hells Angels were as helpful as they could be, he said, in a situation which most people found confusing, including the Hells Angels. If you want to ask what the Hells Angels were doing last night, I'm not going to speak for the Hells Angels. You must ask the Hells Angels themselves. So they're getting that brand over. If you're asking me to issue a put down of the Angels, actually, he's probably covering his ass because he knows this could be edited later by somebody else. So he's not saying them. He's not saying those guys. He's not saying the security that was hired. He's saying, I'm not saying that about the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels have to speak for themselves. Very smart guy, even as blown out as he probably must feel right now. We should all be that clear-headed when giving statements like this. But, his reputation and his physical safety may be on the line, of course. If you want to ask what the Hells Angels were doing last night, I'm not going to speak for the Hells Angels. You must ask the Hells Angels themselves. If you're asking me to issue a put-down of the Angels, which I imagine a lot of people would be only too happy to do, but I'm not prepared to do that. The Angels did as they saw best in a difficult situation, as I have said before. Now, 50% of the people will dig what they did, and 50% will not dig what they did. I don't need to get into a positive anti kind of thing. As far as I'm concerned, they were people who were here, who tried to help in their own way. That night on the broadcast, a procession of the principals in the day's events joined the discussion. Emmett Grogan of the Diggers reported in. He recalled the meeting with Jagger in Hollywood, during which he and Scully had talked to him about the initial plans for the concert when it was still going to be in Golden Gate Park. For the radio audience, Grogan explained how he had envisioned a vast festival of the performing arts, including all factions of the city's community: Black Panthers, La Raza, Chinatown's Red Guard. Why don't you allow the people of San Francisco to throw a party covering Golden Gate Park? He had said he told Jagger. Not just the polo fields, but the whole goddamn park, with stages all over the park. And you'll just come on as one of the bands. That way, there'll be no concentration of people, no madness. Grogan blamed the Stones management team for ruining those plans, although even he wasn't sure who was responsible, and like so many others, thought James worked for the Stones. Okay, Jagger, agreed. We made a list of artists from Dr. John and the Night Tripper to Fred Neil and all these people. The New York office, that's Alan Klein, some guy named Schneider, some fellow named John James. I said to Jagger, the only problem would be getting a permit because they've had a ban on music in the park since the incident midsummer. Ron Schneider and John James, they work for Alan Klein. They said, we have no problem getting permits. We can get them in 2 days. Of course, Grogan's vision for the festival in Golden Gate Park had not come to pass. But there was one part of his conversation with Jagger that did happen. As he detailed to listeners at home, Jagger had told him he didn't want a single policeman to set foot on the concert site, which had led Grogan and Rock Scully to introduce Sam Cutler to the Hells Angels. When it came to presenting the Angels side of things, Pete Nell of the Hells Angels picked up the story, calling the station and explaining on the air how Sam Cutler hired the Angels for $500 worth of beer the first time the public heard that story. He was calm, soft-spoken, matter of fact, and sounded barely concerned about the events of the day before. What happened was, about 2 weeks ago, Sam Cutler came. He said they were nervous about the crowd, had a little trouble in Florida, and so on. What they did was ask us, would we come and help keep the people off the stage? We ain't into that security. He was a sincere fellow. We said we would go there and take care of the stage, and we did that. At first, it was a little hectic, but we settled in. Pretty much the next thing that happened, a guy was waving a gun, and he was taken care of. I'm sorry that happened. Nell answered a couple of questions, but remained unconcerned about the Angels' behavior. He didn't see the controversy. If we say we're going to do something, he said, we do it. Ponik asked him if he didn't feel badly about the death. I feel very badly about it, Nell said. I really do. I'm sorry it happened. Nell said he had no direct knowledge of the killing. I was in the backstage dancing, he said, but he wasn't going to let the incident mar his impression of the day. To me, it was a very enjoyable day, he said. Good, sunshiny day. With the radio show blasting across the Bay Area, somebody phoned Sonny Barger at his home in East Oakland and told him to tune into the show. He took all the cocaine he had in the house and went to his bedroom, dialed up the station, and the station, after figuring out who they had on the line, put his call on the air. Barger came across as reasoned, centered, and plain-spoken, even though he was clearly jacked up on drugs. He wasn't angry or argumentative, but he wanted to stick up for the Angels. As a cocaine-fueled Barger barreled through his side of the story, he brushed aside any attempts to interrupt his flow. Let me finish, then you can ask me anything you want, he said, although he never finished. Talking about his connection to his motorcycle, he sounded like a cowboy speaking about his horse. I don't know if you think we paid $50 for them things or steal them or pay a lot for them or what, Barger said. But most people that's got a good Harley chopper's got a few grand invested in it. Ain't nobody going to kick my motorcycle. And they think because they're in a crowd of 300,000 people, they can do it and get away with it. But when you're standing there looking at something that's your life and everything you've got is invested in that thing, and you love that thing better than you love anything in the world, and you see a guy kick it, you know who he is. And if you have to go through 50 people to get him, you're going to get him. And you know what? They got God. Barger instinctively realized that the angels were going to be blamed for the whole huge, horrible mess. And that the Stones had effectively turned them into their stooges. He took charge of outlining the angels' view on the matter. He offered explanations, not excuses, in a surprising display of public relations awareness from the head of an organization that made a point of not caring what people thought of them. On the radio, Barger pressed his case. He picked up speed, rolled over attempts to interject questions, and, never raising his voice, emanated a quiet authority. I ain't no cop, he said. I ain't never going to pretend to be a cop. And you know what? I didn't go there to police nothing, man. They told me if I could sit on the edge of the stage so nobody would climb over me, I could drink beer until the show was over, and that's what I went there to do. But you know what? Some cat throws something and dings my bike, or some cat kicks my bike over, he's got to fight. And you know what? You could say anything you want, and you can call them people flower children and this and that. And there was 300,000 people there, approximately, or whatever they say, and I guarantee you that the largest majority of them were there to have a good time. But there was a couple thousand of them that was there looking for trouble. And at this point, Pontiac says, Sonny, just about that question. Some of them people out there ain't a bit better than what some of the people think the worst of us, man. All right, let me read it again. Some of them people out there ain't a bit better than what some of the people think of the worst of us, man. And it's about time they realized it. And they can call in and call us kind of lousy dogs like we shouldn't be at these places and this and that. But you know what? When they started messing over our bikes, they started it. Pontiac says, Sonny, you've got it right there, man. You've got it by letting people know exactly where you're at. And I am not no peace creep by any sense of the word. But you know what, man? If a cat don't want to fight with me and don't want to hassle with me, you know what? I want to be his friend. If he don't want to be my friend, then out of sight. Don't even talk to me. But if he don't want to be my friend and he's going to get in my face, I'm going to hurt him or he's going to hurt me. And you know what? It really doesn't matter if he hurts me because I've been hurt before. And you know what? I've been hurt by experts. But over the years, I've learned how to get up and do it again. Pontiac says, okay, thanks a lot, man. I think you've done a lot to enlighten a lot of people as to just what was going on. Bill Graham also took to the airwaves to weigh in on the concert. Voluble, proud, and furious with the Stones, Graham had never liked outdoor events. For those who don't know, Bill Graham was a legendary promoter of San Francisco, theater shows and club shows and things like that. I mean, years later, hey, tying it back into Metallica, he's the guy that put on some of their big Day on the Green festivals, I believe. So he got over his hatred of outdoor festivals, certainly after a while, but there's a great photo of Metallica sitting with him after the Day on the Green show, I believe it is, in with all the garbage everywhere after the day or the night of or something like that. And he's the guy that had to give James Hetfield a good dressing down back in the mid 80s after Metallica played their first Day on the Green and just spent the whole time when they weren't playing smashing up the trailer they were in, not realizing that, someone else was going to use that trailer the next day. And they just filled the ventilation full of smashed fruit and kicked dents into all the walls and smashed all the glass they found and, made it just sort of a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Billy Graham's the guy that went in and yelled at James Hetfield until he just agreed to apologize and pay for the damages and straighten up and fly right. And then years later, when Metallica came back to play a Bill Graham show, I believe it was he that ordered everything in their trailer to be wrapped up in cellophane so as to prevent staining or damaging or anything of the sort. They thought that was very funny. back to the Altamont narrative, what Graham liked was selling tickets and maybe a few Cokes to the orderly crowds he hosted at his Fillmores. Still stinging from the Stones' snub of him, both in his bid to produce the entire tour and backstage between shows at the Oakland concert, he sounded off, antagonistic, combative, and all too willing to let listeners know that, to him, the blame lay almost exclusively with the Stones. Now, I'm reading this next section to wrap it all up because not only, does the Altamont disaster thing tie in with the Guns N' Roses disaster concerts, but this next bit sounds like it could happen. This could be today on social media. This is happening every day on social media. Pardon me, now that I think about what I'm saying. This just happened today with a certain public media figure and just going on public channels and being outraged that the president of the United States of America won't sit down and have a conversation with him, won't debate him. This person I'm talking about, I don't even think is a legal adult yet. This person is famous for shooting people in the streets with what I think was an AR-15. I don't care. I'm not looking it up. I don't remember. For the record, I feel the same way about people that use the Parkland, massacre or some high school shooting to become underage mouthpieces for a certain movement and demand that the people in Congress or the president sit down with them one-on-one for the public eye. Anyways, just so you know, my hypocrisy knows no bounds, or that I just don't have any loyalty or allegiance to anyone or that isn't rock and roll. I would offer Mr. Jagger $50,000, Graham said, to go on coast-to-coast television or radio with me, not stoned, not copping out, but sit down, mister, and rap open for an hour. I'll ask you what right you had, Mr. Jagger, to walk out on stage every night with your Uncle Sam hat, throw it down with complete disdain, and leave this country with 1.8 million? And what right did you have in going through with this free festival? And you couldn't tell me you didn't know the way it would have come off. What right did you have to leave the way you did, thanking everyone for a wonderful time and the angels for helping out? He's now in his home country somewhere. What did he leave throughout the country? Every gig he was late. Every bleep gig. That's the bleep is in the text. I'm not adding that. I'm not saying that instead of a dirty word. There's no dirty word printed. Every bleep gig, he made the promoter and the people bleed. What right does this God have to descend on this country this way? It will give me great pleasure to tell the public that Mick Jagger is not God Jr., and it's worth it to me. I am not trying to blast at someone that is 10,000 miles away, but you know what is a great tragedy to me? That bleep is a great entertainer. All right, friends. Well, thanks for joining me on this miscellaneous episode. Clocking in about almost 2.5 hours now. That used to be what a normal episode was about a year ago at this time. And I thought that was a lot of hard work back then. I appreciate you letting me get out all the extra stuff that I couldn't cram into something else. I know that sounds oddly sexual, but it's not. I am really, really happy that I got to work some of these thoughts out with miscellaneous notes. I want to also cover a couple of lingering miscellaneous notes that I realize I may have left hanging. I realized that I might have created the wrong impression in a couple of places earlier. I'm not going back to re-edit them where they happened because I've got a lot of special timed, volume changes and panning changes and effects and things that I can't easily move around unless I do some serious work. And who cares? The first thing I want to address is the whole end of rock thing in the late 90s. I realized I didn't wrap that up with the sort of a final thought or a final clarification. I was not using that to say that there's been no rock and roll since then or there's nothing good. I'm saying in a mainstream sense, in a publicly, an industry that gets behind dangerous music and gets behind exciting experimental things, that kind of ended. We're talking about rock radio only. We're talking about some MTV too, but there's obviously lots of inventive, exciting, rock music that came after that era. There's obviously the Mars Volta. There's obviously, your System of a Down. There's obviously tons of weird, artsy, experimental things. But, and yeah, there was Airplay. Yeah, there was MTV, but not as much as there should have been or could have been. And they're the sort of shining examples of what got through. The fact of the matter is, those are the artists that those record labels devoted their annual budget to for promotion. Whereas they used to have multiple artists they would devote annual budgets to for promotion. And, for the last 20 years, all they generally do is just wait and see who's going to decide to back whom and then pull the budget money from their other artists to just back one pony per year. And the second point is I also didn't want to create the impression that I think that after Guns N' Roses, Nirvana, the Black Album, Soundgarden, and all that stuff came out in 91, that there was no, kind of butt rocky style, upbeat, guitar-oriented, music scene that tried to carry on, even though most of them, yes, did get their budgets taken away, or their video production taken away, their touring support taken away. There was more music that came after that, that was in the vein of the 80s Sunset Strip thing, but a little more 90s sounding. The problem is what was coming out in a new form from there was a little behind, and they just they had recorded albums and they were going to come out because, damn it, they were there. Too late to find out that there wasn't going to be much promotion or much of an audience left. But there still were, there was stuff I heard in like 92, 93 on Z-Rock. There was stuff like Shotgun Messiah, who'd been around for, I think, at least an album or two before that. There was stuff like Tora Tora about that time. I can't even remember what song they did. There was a band called War Babies, and I think they were out of Seattle. Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam, very, very briefly subbed in that band as their bassist, I believe. There's a lot of commercial hair rock that wasn't as glossy as the 80s hair rock. But largely it went under the radar and slowly kind of poofed out and died in a puff of smoke because a lot of it, maybe not all the artists I just named, I didn't want to pretend like I wasn't aware of them, but a lot of them sounded fairly generic and tuneless. They sounded, I would say, overly funky without a really good low end or a really good emphasis on a groove. And they sounded overly scatty in the vocal department because of what had happened with Faith No More and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Like this.
The freak phone, and here's the party freak.
Oh, here's the fucking freak phone again.
Freaker, dance new sensation.
That guy's the guy's got his dick in that puppet.
And the nation doing the freak. Call now 1-900-490-FREAK. Join the party the fast and easy way to hear what's scamming from New York to LA.
Like, I'm curious to know what this was, right? Like, I would like to hear a recording. Like, what the fuck? Like this is one of those things where it's so weird. People probably just called just out of curiosity, and they were like, "Oh, this sucks," and then they hung up. But then they got a bill for $50.
Call now 1-900-490-FREAK. What's happening? What's jamming? Party till you drop. Dial and hear the action. What's hot and what's not? Call now 1-900-490-FREAK. $2 a call.
The freak phone.
Yow! That kind of stuff. That was my good friend Max Pearson out of Indiana. Known him since we both went to the Roberto Venn School of Lutherie in Phoenix, Arizona in the year 2000. Learned how to build guitar fiddles. We've both carried on a career in building and repair up until the point where we decided we had to get some other kind of job to pay some serious bills and continue doing repairs in our free time on the weekends, which we both continued to do. That was from one of his live streams at like midnight on a Saturday on YouTube. This one night in particular, he did nothing but watching 1990s call-in phone lines, like 1-900 or 976 phone line commercials. This was months ago, and I heard that song, recorded it, and saved it for this episode so I could explain what happened when Sunset Strip-inspired hard rock kept going after this era of music. I think that's all that was left of it. I don't think we're missing out on anything super amazing from a lot of those bands. Thanks so much for being here and giving a damn about any of these subjects and listening to me try to get into them with you. I definitely want to encourage you to share this with other people. As I said, I encourage you to do whatever it takes to have a really good life, at least a really good week or a good day. You absolutely deserve to be happy. You absolutely deserve good things in your life because I said so. I know you're good. You're here. You're listening to something I did. That makes you, quite frankly, almost a philanthropist. There's a lot of shitty podcasts out there you could be listening to right now. But you chose this one. For that, I salute you. Rock and roll's the best. So were you. Remember, there's no ends that justify the means. There's just the means. We'll all be at war with Mars soon. Enjoy this life any way you can.